Tarot, astrology, and other divinatory arts are not a replacement or substitute for psychiatric or physical health care. Blessings, everyone. It's time for another major astrological transit discussion, and in this video, we are going to be taking a deep dive into the examination of Saturn entering Pisces, taking place on March 7th, 2023, and is going to be the main theme of the next 2.5 years. This year, we have Saturn going into Pisces and staying there, going strong, giving us kind of a nutshell preview of this next 2.5 years from March through June. It's going to retrograde back into Aquarius for a short while to take care of some old, obsolete business, and then at the end of this year, return to Pisces for a more committed 2.5 year stay. But as we go into March, all of these experiences are just coming on strong. We're going to be taking this a bit slowly. I wrote almost a 10-page essay about this as part of my notes for this video. So I am also going to be putting this video in chapters, so people who might want to come back and revisit certain questions or certain topics and review, that's going to be available for you. So the outline for this video, we're going to be talking about how Saturn and Pisces, and therefore Neptune, because we've got Neptune in Pisces as well, mix and interact, and how that affects the personal experience. We're also going through some major 30-year cycle and timeline shifts that have been underway for about 2.5 years, but now they are closing up. That transition period is closing up, and so we're going to be talking about those on a personal level and on a societal level, and then we're going to wrap up with some of my predictions for the world and what is going to be taking place throughout the course of the next 2.5 years, and then on into 2025 when Saturn moves into Aries. If you are not familiar with my style of doing major transit examinations, remember, because I end up going so deep and really getting into the information, I already have listed below in the description bar beneath this video all areas of life that are coming into chief focus for each sign. And so if you have a particular sign you want to look at, open the down bar below so that you can see, okay, that's what's going on with this sign, that's what's going on with that one. And remember to also make sure you're checking your rising sign, your ascendant. Remember to check all this stuff out before you do anything else. If you're listening to this video while you're cleaning the house or you're in the car, take a second and just see safely what area of life is going to be coming into chief focus so that the rest of this all makes sense, and so you can see where most of it's getting applied. Of course, I don't know when everybody is born, and I don't know where everyone's planets are, so everyone's experience is going to vary a little bit, but this is the core of Saturn in Pisces. If you guys ever want to get a session with me, you just need to go on ahead to my website. It's integrativemysticism.com, or you can follow the links in the down bar below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this video. You know I appreciate it, and of course, engagement helps this channel grow. So just a bit of a quick review. We've got an interesting mix of astrological influences going on here. We've got Saturn, the planet of order, discipline, structure, priority, lessons, boundaries, limitations, emphasized maturity, emphasized evolution, and effort, blending with the energies of Pisces, and therefore also Neptune, because Neptune rules Pisces, the energies of imagination, creativity, fantasy, inspiration, dreams, fluidity, adaptability, peace, altruism, connectivity, consciousness, and the spirit. And the thing to keep in mind, is that when Saturn is in a sign that is not his exaltation, it's not his detriment, it's not his domicile, it's not his fall, he is a very supportive and gracious guest. We're going to be having a Saturn experience that is very different than, say, if Saturn were in Libra or Saturn were in Cancer, and certainly different than when Saturn was in Capricorn and Aquarius, where he was at home. Saturn's heavily organized and structured forces mix with that mutable energy of Pisces, which also brings, out the best in Neptune and brings out the best in Saturn. And so these are combining forces very harmoniously. Saturn becomes a champion of Piscean priorities. Again, that peace, imagination, creativity, spirituality, altruism, consciousness, and this, all of that. And that is because Saturn, not being at home, is taking this as an opportunity to learn and evolve himself, a good cooperative guest. Sensibility shifts will be strongly geared towards bringing the Pisces priorities into our lives collectively and individually, because Saturn will be enforcing them, backing them up, while also grounding them so that they are more quick to manifest their virtues. So we have help in bringing all of that goodness of Pisces forth into being, and also filtering out some of the more problematic tendencies that we might associate with Neptune or with Pisces. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go on in the video. There is also a shift away from the heavy focus on control, structures, modeled living, and the dependence on models and all kinds of lattice works and things like that. And that is also largely in part because we have Pluto also leaving Capricorn after 14 years at the end of March, so stay tuned for that video. But Saturn is also getting a lot of that underway, a lot of the shift away from that kind of experience out of the picture, a little bit ahead of schedule, and then more so as Pluto finally leaves Capricorn. But again, that we're getting off topic. We're going to get back to Saturn and Pisces. There is a feeling of restoration, youth, vitality, innocence, a renewal of the inner child, imagination, creativity, and the realization of fantasies and dreams and one's own innate spiritual nature that can be quite euphoric throughout this period, right? There is an expansive quality that comes because it's bringing out the best in Saturn and the best in Neptune and the best in Pisces all at once. This is also a time of special treatment for everybody on an individual level, which will have far-reaching effects collaterally, collectively. That is because masculine Saturn and feminine Neptune will be combining both forces to a mature balance for everybody. This in turn restores a lot of opportunities for growth, wealth, fantasy fulfillment, spiritual evolution, mastery, divine love, and creativity for everybody. There is a feeling of discovery and movement that is very free and yet secure getting underway, right? That's why this is about discovery, deliverance, and great advancement. Think of being discovered for a gift, a quality, something that sets you apart by an authority figure, a teacher, an ally, a lover, a companion, and being brought out of the circumstances you've been navigating for maybe the last 2.5 to 5 years, or maybe even the last 30 years, because we do have that big 30-year cycle timeline discussion to get into, and being brought home, so to speak. Of course, it sounds beautiful, because it is, but this will also be somewhat challenging, as this also means removing everything that we might consider a comfortable detriment, right? Things that are not good for us, but we are comfortable with, we are accustomed to, things that we have learned to feel at home with or learned to be attached to that are holding us back, keeping us in a place of lack or doubt or fear or dysfunction in any way. There is a feeling of mobility anxiety that can come from being lifted up, right? Being lifted up from, maybe one level in a class and going on up into the advanced placement class can create anxiety, or moving from junior varsity to varsity can create mobility anxiety, or maybe falling in love can create mobility anxiety, getting promoted and transferred create mobility anxiety. And this is especially because Saturn and Neptune together are pushing for our growth, maturity, and success, but also challenging our complacency. Depending on where this falls in your chart, you're going to be getting a preview of what is to come, and it's starting to manifest, right? It's already starting to have its seeds planted and sprout between March and June of 2023. And this is going to be the time where after June, Saturn retrogrades back and go clean up the old place, right? Go clean up the old apartment, clean up the old house, clean up the old situation so that we can fully commit to the new. Some of you may have already been getting this underway. A lot of signs, especially water signs and especially earth signs, have been going through this already, especially from about 2020 until now when Saturn went into Aquarius and began wrapping things up. But everybody is going to be going through this. So pay attention to where you're being guided, what is getting built up, and what is getting torn down during this time, right? You are getting this discovery movement, you're getting the lift for mobility, you're getting the opportunity to transition into a new space, right? Deliverance, discovery, great advancement, which also means great love, great abundance, all of it. But you need to be ready to handle mobility anxiety that comes from jumping up a class, so to speak, however that applies in your situation. So let's talk about these 30-year cycles and 30-year timelines that, seem to be coming up over and over again in this conversation. We're going to talk about it first on a personal level. What's going to be going on with you? The key themes here are discovery and upliftment, but with a realization that you will be retiring from many commitments and leaving many stories and timelines that have been in play in your life for this last 30 years. And it doesn't matter how old you are, right? If you look back at 1993, I was 8, right? That it might be a little bit, incumbent upon me to introspect a little bit. What stories, what themes occurred then that set up my life for this last 30 years. Maybe you weren't 8. Maybe you were 20. Maybe you were 40. Maybe you weren't born yet. If you were born after 1993 or born in 1993, or maybe you were 1 or 2, this will likely have a collateral effect on you due to the shifts and stories of your environment that have been in play, so to speak, since that time, or highly influenced by events of that time, maybe going on in your family, going on in your home, in your community. This does shape, right, how we have gone through a lot of our own growth, a lot of our own development, how you handled your job, your relationships, your education, your personal discipline, your health, everything. The reason 30 years is so significant in this is because that was the last time Saturn was in Pisces. And so whenever Saturn goes through a full run of all 12 signs of the zodiac, he closes up and eliminates a lot of cycles and timelines that would have been occurring over the course of that previous 30 years. And we'll talk about that when we get to the discussion of the societal level. So hang tight. We will revisit what I was just saying in a moment. Because of this transition, there will likely be some kind of culminating event that completes your transition into this higher lane of your life, because that is Saturn's priority. And so this culminating event may occur between March and June of this year and start to really get down to work. It may be one event or it may be a series of events. Saturn may not necessarily be nice, but he is good. And I think that's important to remember, especially because we're coming out of a time where a lot of people have no discernment skills and can't tell the difference between nice and good. Evolution, advancement, prosperity, security, and harmony are always Saturn's priority. Breakdown breakthrough experiences can be abstracted in many different ways, and so you can think of it almost like an ending and a beginning. And so I've listed a few examples here. Some of you have already been in this process, as I said, since about the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. But this is what is culminating now, this whole transition period getting underway. A job loss or transition followed by a more lucrative career. A personal life separation or departure followed by stronger connections, closer friendships, and new love. A relationship or marital arrangement falling apart and being replaced by a new one. A health scare followed by a cure that also solves another unknown problem. A family falling out followed by a reunion or the creation of a healthier family setup. a reveal and confrontation of a family curse or dysfunction, followed by the elimination of it. A household collapse, followed by a move to a better environment and a renewal or an establishment of a true sense of home in the world. These are all examples of breakdown, breakthrough experiences. Now, this could have all come on at once, or this could have been a drawn-out or elongated experience over the course of this last 2.5 years, but the culmination and the sealing of the deal is taking place this year. Saturn only takes what does not belong and was already breaking down. This is not a time of surprises or big shocks. Many of my clients I have already done assessments of these matters with were all well aware of what's been going on. Nobody has been caught by surprise, right? This is also something to keep in mind. These are not surprising events or shocking events, unless in maybe some cases, say in like family situations or whatever's going on, there may be, denial or defiance that can come with a bit of a shock as those emotions keep, catch up with us. But none of these things are surprises. Going a little bit deeper into the discussion of the last 30 years, we've been in a 30-year continuum since 93 that is ending now. Saturn entering Pisces begins the transition into a new 3-part continuum for everybody. All Saturn cycles through the zodiac have 3-part continuums. So we can look at them as like acts in a show. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And so 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. For example, the 60s, 70s, and 80s were a 3-part continuum. And the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s were a part of one continuum. We are closing that continuum and starting something anew. And these cycles all go in the same order every time. Creation, integration, and resolution. So 10 years of creation and discovery, 10 years of integration, and 10 years of resolution. We have been in a resolution phase throughout the course of the 2010s. So resolution is all about taking what was created and integrated and then assessing, where it has been working and not working for people, managing how people handle or don't handle these shifts or these integrations well, trying to find ways to resolve that which may have been, refusing to grow or evolve or advance over the course of that first creation and integration phase of that 30 years, and really getting that in order, seeing where everything is, what's working, what's not working, what needs to stay, what needs to go, and that is where a lot of the 2010s went. It can be a catch-up period for some people, and it can be a tear-down period for others. How the creation phase plays out can be seen when we reflect on old creation phases. And so when we look back at the 1990s, the most recent creation phase of the Saturn cycle, we see the emergence of the internet for everybody. Home computers become normalized, and there was the cracking of the human genome, for instance, and these fundamentally altered the way we exist in such a way that the previous 30 years, right, the 60s, 70s, and 80s, could not be carried on the way they were. There was a bit of a through line there, but it didn't work anymore. And we are now coming into a space where a lot of the through line of the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s isn't working anymore either. And so things are forced to evolve overnight or collapse in obsolescence. Now, with Saturn and Neptune together this time, there isn't going to be that disparity, which is really, really good. Last time it was just Saturn all by himself in Pisces, kind of forcing advancement with no compassion. Now we've got a little bit of that Neptune energy doing it right, working together, making it easier. But the same, of course, is going to be applying to the way we've done business, the way we've gone about our lives, the way we've handled ourselves this last 30 years. These transformations can and will be both fantastic and terrifying at the same time. Sensibility shifts in terms of economy, philosophy, social organization, and structure will be profound. You know, again, think about how the 80s and 90s were almost like the difference between black and white and color as far as mood, energy, attitude, atmosphere, and cultural sensibility are concerned. That is what we're talking about here. And it's going to feel this way this year. What was working or going on, 2016, 17, 18, 19, even 2020, is just going to feel like decades, centuries ago, in another world, right? What was working back then won't work now. What was happening back then won't happen now. That is the way Saturn works when he is in Pisces. And it kind of feels that way too, right? Because even when we look back, it's like the 2010s was really just kind of like the 80s with the internet. And so now we've got this push, right? That is kind of saying, all right, time for another threshold to be crossed. So how do Saturn and Neptune actually work together throughout the course of this next few years? How do they work together? What makes it different this time than maybe the 1990s or the 1960s, which were the other creation eras, which were the two most recent creation eras of this last century? Well, Neptune in Pisces, which has been there since 2011, has been amplified, of course, because it's on its home turf, it's in its domicile, and will still be there all the way up through 2026. This has had its benefits, especially because it has contributed to a great deal of growth in the evolution of consciousness, spirituality, philosophy, but it's also had its drawbacks. Too much water, not enough earth, until now, can create a very confusing and dysregulated experience, especially when it comes to collective sensibilities, psychology, and security. Because water sign energy can often be prone to excess in behavior, right? People having trouble being, staying moderate with their emotions, moderate with their activities, moderate with their relationships, maybe sometimes even moderate with their vices. Saturn's move into Pisces will bring a great deal of easing away from the more consuming or negatively mind-altering elements of our world. And contemporarily, this will be most strongly felt with how we approach spirituality, health, psychology, and relationships. And this will also be having a profound effect on our approach to things like social media, which I feel will actually be getting largely downscaled in terms of its prominence and influence in our lives. Coming back to life, and maybe even downscaling back to the way we behaved with social media, going into the very first beginnings of Neptune going into Pisces. So our relationship with social media is going to be a lot more like it was back in 2011, 2012, 2013. And less so the way it's been, the last 5, 6, 7 years, which is actually really good, right? Because we've all seen it go into a very unhealthy place. This is especially welcome because normally the last 10 years of a Saturn cycle can be the most extreme and bring out the most extreme, consuming and unstable natures of people. We've seen that as well. Black and white thinking, tribalism, regressive behavior, persona manufacturing, propaganda, and escapism. And they're all discordant and toxic manifestations that can show up in the resolution phase of a Saturn cycle. Sometimes things show up, and manifest during these periods to try and bring order, which is why usually in a resolution phase, such as the 2010s or the 1980s, or even going back to the 1950s, there was always this rise of like self-help, personal development, model, remedial model living, setting up remedial structures to try and like make sense of it all. But in a lot of cases, those always end up coddling the sickness more than focusing on the health. And so because it is during the resolution phase that there is a crashing of the new and the old, the developed and the underdeveloped, the stable and the unstable, the authentic versus the false, and other dichotomies that highlight what these clashes are, it's been a very uncomfortable decade. That's kind of like the last 10 years at its worst. But Saturn moving on into Pisces is getting us away from all of that as well, and bringing a lot of those experiences and those phenomena and even a lot of those industries to their knees. There will be a huge lashback against what used to be considered aspirational, especially with regards to fabricated personalities, fabricated realities, fabricated health. This will also bring out a lot of revelations with regards to the psychological, emotional, and physical health beliefs and myths that have been explored and in some cases held true, whether they were or not. This is what also spelled the end of the 1980s self-help personal development craziness and cult behavior that was so big at the time, if you recall. So we're going through all of this at once. All of this at once. So make sure that we are allowing ourselves to lean into these changes as they come up, because of course this is going to be happening over and over and over again as Saturn completes his journey through Pisces this next 2.5 years. But remember, this is all happening for everyone's own good, right? We are all getting a chance to be discovered, delivered, and advanced and brought where we are at our best. So let's talk about some real-world predictions. You know, I want to get back into that because as I was looking into, you know, where this is going and how these cycles are playing out and what cycles are concluding, I'm seeing some really juicy stuff that I think a lot of people are going to be happy to see. So let's talk about some Saturn and Pisces predictions for 2023 to 2025. So there's going to be a lot of breakthroughs and cures in treatments for long-standing diseases and illnesses. If you recall, if you were following me back then, back in 2020 and 2021, I was talking about how the Jupiter in Aquarius and Jupiter into Pisces moves was going to begin the process of accelerating cures and treatments for long-standing illnesses as well, namely the HIV virus, which causes, of course, AIDS. Since then, 5 cures have been documented as of the time I am making this video. And a lot of that also has to do with the Saturn transit. Saturn's move into Pisces in the 1990s began the real work in antiretroviral treatment. And in 1994, when Saturn was still in Pisces, there was also the discovery and cloning of the BRCA1 gene, which is linked to breast cancer. And Saturn will be bringing many victorious conclusions to the fight against such illnesses during this transit, and maybe even having it finally set in stone as we get into 2025 when he finally goes on into Aries. This could happen faster, but this is what I predict is going to be, you know, really making headlines throughout the course of this next couple of years, because Saturn in Pisces also puts a big focus on health, as well as also clearing and closing up journeys with illnesses such as these. Because Pisces is the sign of altruism and peace, I do also see the end of a lot of conflicts, including the Russia-Ukraine conflict. While Saturn is in Pisces, I'm also seeing a shift in economic policy to the advancement and acceleration in fuel, right? Fuel evolution towards more affordable and reliable energy. Yes, while many are saying that fusion energy is at least 10 to 15 years out, I do see that there will be some rather big pushes racing it forward. So I'm not saying necessarily that we'll all be on fusion power over the course of the next 2.5 years, but I am seeing that we are going to discover some means of finally implementing on the way to it, which is, again, going to have its ripple effects on our cost, on our economy as it relates to fuel and energy for everyone's better, but there can always be a few shakeups during that period, right? This is one of the big technological advancements that wipes out the last 30 years, right? Kind of like home computers and the internet and cracking the human genome did in the 90s to the 30 years prior to that. Saturn, the professor, the headmaster, is going to be making this a faster move than estimated because that's what he does in Pisces. This will ultimately lead to a dramatic shift in cost and therefore expense in all markets and manufacturing, shifting our economic quality of life globally. This will also be what brings about the first incarnations of the universal basic income for many countries. And yes, I do see that getting underway over the course of this coming 2.5 years between now and 2025. This will, however, not be without its disruptions. Many industries and sensibilities will struggle to keep up with where technology is going, and there will be a lot of displacement activity going on, especially with the evolution of AI and robots, another technological advent that occurred this last 10 years, but will be again brought forward and into, I guess you could say, the common experience for everybody as we go through the 2020s, in particular, again, 2023 to 2025 and 2026. Redundancy will be a big topic for the first half of the 2020s. However, this will be somewhat more eased and less jarring than people anticipate. Remember, Neptune and Saturn together are doing this way more gently than we experienced back in the 90s with the internet and computers and all of that. And this, of course, will also affect how we handle things like education and just trickle on down into pretty much the corner of everything. However, there will also be, interestingly enough, a shift in our cultural sensibility to value that which is not artificially produced, that which is not canned, that which is not outsourced, that which is not following cookie cutter models and things like that. That is also because Saturn in Pisces will be bringing in the focus to get our soul back. Soul retrieval, spiritually and metaphorically, is a very strong experience during this time, especially when it comes to the elimination of the artificial. This is the end of a 30-year cycle, so artificial anything taken on in the last 30 years is coming up for elimination. This includes false beliefs, false narratives, false family stories, false findings, false relationships, false community, and false identity. This includes a tremendous breaking of many spiritual and New Age movements that have been, with a focus on returning to more disciplined, individually accountable, and organic spiritual practices. For those of you curious about that, I'm excited. This will also spell the end of the personal development movement, but both of these shifts are more, again, Pluto going on into Aquarius, which, again, we'll discuss that in a later video. Going back to AI for a second, and also including other creations that could be seen as automated intelligence, such as algorithms that have been imposed on our media since the mid-2010s, there will be a great deal of reforms and rollbacks going on that will prevent such things from getting out of control, as well as rolling back things that have already been out of control. You'll recall earlier in the video when I mentioned that our relationship with social media is going back to the way it was, you know, in the early 2010s, 2011, 2012, 2013. And that also comes with a lot of algorithmic rollbacks, right? So this is something that I feel is good for the health of all. And I think a lot of people will agree that this is going to be a good step backwards. But this can be very disruptive, especially when it comes to commerce, when it comes to media, because so much, especially of this last few years, has been about serving the algorithm to get your money. And so if you have been maybe conducting your businesses this way, if this is how maybe a certain company has grown big or how a person's been promoting themselves, this is going to be a bit of an adjustment, right? But I do think that, again, because this is about getting something that was out of control back under control, in the highest interest of all concerned, it will be a welcome shift once the shift has done its job. The manic dashes of the 2010s towards implementation, especially when it comes to things like the algorithm, will be undergoing serious reform in order to not only negate the toxic effects they did have individually and collectively, which we've seen, but also in the case of AI, steer them in a direction where they'll be more manageable and free of corruption and free from the potential for abuse. And a big reason for that has to do with the fact that Saturn and Neptune working together is a blend of the Earth sign energy and the water sign energy at its most enlightened. So how do you navigate this change? If it was a time of thriving and success for you this last 10 years or so, you're going to have to be ready to change your strategies because the time where that worked is over, but that's normal, right? We don't want to, rest on our laurels. If it was a time of pain and lack, be prepared for big turnarounds and turning a corner in a good way. Everything is getting leveled out. If you felt trapped or you had the rug pulled out from under you, be prepared for Saturn to make some huge environmental alterations to help get you ahead. And the only markets and only business that will suffer are the ones who really relied on abusing what's been in order to get ahead. In short, What's worked this last few years doesn't work going forward, so be prepared to adapt. Much of 2023 will have this come on fast, especially March through June. So I think we are going to wrap it up here for everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You know I appreciate it, and of course engagement helps this channel out a lot. And if you do ever want to get a session with me, you can go on ahead to my website. It's integrativemysticism.com, and have a blessed Saturn in Pisces transit. Again, this is going to be tremendous for everybody.